morning.
Good morning.
How is everybody?
Good.
Yeah, we're good.
Nice
Jim?
to see you again. Nice to see you in a long time, Tom.
Hi,
Wow.
Lori Carnahan.
Lori. Casey.
Tony.
Terry. You know what? Don't tell me your name yet. I'm gonna get a sign-in sheet going, and that'll let me familiarize myself with you guys' names. Have you met Stephanie?
Yes.
Good.
Very briefly.
Glad to hear it. And my apologies for being late. I got a little unanticipated weather, as you can tell. How's it been? Other than being wet? Fine. Have you moved away?
Have I what?
Are you still in the city of Lawrence?
No, I'm retired,
That's,
but I've been retained as a special projects manager,
okay, very good.
in part to help finish the negotiation of this agreement.
Negotiations are good, good. Which of you is Dean? Dean, hi. I'm Jim. We've talked a time or two.
Yes, sir. Good
Please,
visit.
please attach name to the face. Are we ready to get going? Yeah?
Maybe we should have
We're ready.
everybody introduce themselves for
Okay.
Stephanie's benefit.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Steph, you want to get started?
Sure, I mean, I sort of briefly did. Commissioner Stephanie Haynes, and glad to be here. Hopefully we can be of some help through the next several days and looking forward to getting to understand your issues and getting to know you all a little better.
Are you new to the office here?
I am new to the Kansas City office, as in last year.
Okay. And so where did you come from?
I came from the East Coast.
Oh.
So Philly, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, but I actually grew up here, so it was coming back home.
Great.
So grew up in
Welcome.
Kansas City.
Stephanie has been a welcome addition to the office.
I'll bet.
It's been touch and go for me for about the last year in terms of getting things accomplished
Yeah.
in her absence from the office, but she's quite welcome, and you'll find her to be quite competent and very well studied on issues
Well, thank you.
and that sort of thing.
You really think that?
No, I really don't, but I figured it was probably diplomatic to say so.
I'm just kidding.
You have it recorded, so you can.
I just play.
I'm Jim. My last name is Albano, A-L-B-A-N-O. I am commissioner. Been in Kansas City for the last 4 years and all over the place, Chicago, Cleveland, places like that prior to coming to Kansas City. So I did not bring business cards with me today. I kind of shun those things anyway because they tend to go into a briefcase and never emerge. So, nice to meet you all.
I'm Sean Coffey, the fire chief for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical Department.
Sean, pleased to meet you.
I'm Doug Green, a division chief with Fire Medical.
Okay,
I'm Tony Wheeler, city attorney.
very good.
Letting Stephanie write. I'm Casey Toomey. I am one of the assistant city managers there.
Okay, good.
Jill Jelliker, I'm the assistant to the county administrator for Douglas County.
Okay,
I'm Lori Carnahan, Human Resources Manager.
I'm Tom Marcus, former city manager, currently special projects manager to the city manager.
very good. Thanks, Tom.
Seamus Alberton, member of the IAFF.
Nice to meet you.
What was your first name?
Seamus?
Chance. S-E-A?
Yes, ma'am.
And Dean.
Yes, sir. Dean Garrison.
Aaron Payne, local. Jason Williams.
Very good. Thank you all for that.
Did you get a copy of the agenda, Jim?
No, I did not get a copy of
Is
the
it in
agenda.
front of him?
Well, I'll tell you what, before we hit the agenda, I have something, Tom, that you'll probably be familiar with, if you recall from last year.
Right.
It's our pro forma mediation agreement, and what it is pro forma with our agency. And basically what it is a confidentiality agreement. But just as sort of an introduction to the process itself, what Stephanie and I bring to the table are basically, number one, impartiality. I don't know what your issues are. I have had no substantive conversation about what issues you guys have remaining open, where you are in your process, other than I believe you're at impasse for the purposes of implementing the resolution.
Correct.
And that's really all we know about it. For the most part, we prefer it that way because we don't want to come in with any preconceived notions of where you guys have been, what's been going on. We'll get enough of a flavor of that over the next day or two to be able to wrap our heads around what your issues are, at least to the extent that we're able to do that. And again, we bring probably 50 years of experience having done this sort of thing before. So I have generally found that the moment I say there's nothing we haven't seen or nothing we haven't heard, I find out quite quickly how wrong I am. So I don't want to overstate, but at the same time don't want to understate or anything else like that. But that is a long-winded way of characterizing what we refer to as our impartiality. The other characteristic of mediation that we need you to agree to is the notion of confidentiality. As a general proposition, we of course do not make recordings of proceedings with the mediator. Now, whether that is in caucus with you all or whether it's in here, we do not make recordings. If we take notes, and we'll probably take pretty copious notes with respect to you guys, but at the end of the day, those notes are kind of ripped up and tossed away. Under our ordinary charter, which is basically the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, commissioners like us can't be subpoenaed. Our notes can't be subpoenaed. We operate under strict confidentiality rules, and in that regard, our thought processes and stuff like that are privileged for the purposes of moving forward should mediation not be successful. So that's to a great extent what this particular mediation agreement is all about. Again, it's primarily a confidentiality agreement, and it is fully effective to illustrate what our participation would be and how we approach it moving forward. A couple things in terms of process that I want you to be aware of, and some of the folks sitting here at the table, of course, are familiar to me, so they've heard this before. I wish not to bore them to death. One of the, in terms of process, I suspect what we'll probably do today, I noticed that, of course, Tom drew my attention to it. You all have an agenda, so in a second I'll take a look at that agenda. We'll take a look at that agenda and move forward according to your agenda. Typically in mediation, though not all the time, but typically in mediation, we meet in sessions like this, which we refer to as a joint session because the two parties are together. But very often, and depending on what the issue is, and in terms of putting our best foot forward to try to get you guys to settlement, I'll often ask for a caucus where Stephanie and I will want to meet with one or the other party in order to clarify certain positions, offer a suggestion about what might draw you closer together. The idea behind that is twofold. Number one, in terms of the joint session, you will not hear anything from Stephanie or I beyond the four corners of this room. If, for example, Kansas operates under a sunshine law, and if, for example, a member of the press asks us what's going on, as much as we will say about it is we met on day one, progress was made, and we intend to meet on day two. That's as much as you're going to see from us. So in terms of exterior confidentiality, we don't typically go beyond that. There aren't any real circumstances where I've ever done it. So that's just as information to you. So in other words, what is said in here, what's said in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas in terms of a joint session. Likewise, in terms of a caucus where Stephanie and I might meet with the firefighters organization, for example, or alternatively the city representatives, what is said in those venues will stay in those venues unless and until Stephanie or I think that it might be helpful to convey a certain position, convey this, that, or the other to the other side that might move you closer together to a settlement. But you will always be aware of our intent to convey that because we'll ask you for specific authority before we do that. And again, it's part and parcel of the confidential nature of our interaction here. So we can make you those promises, and I think that about covers the general rule of what's going on. Dean, I understand that you're the chief negotiator for the firefighters organization?
Yes, sir.
This is, you don't need to sign this. Tom, are you running with the football on this one?
Yes.
You've seen this from last year, it's identical.
Okay.
I want you guys to take a moment to read that and ask us any questions at all that you would have in terms of what those provisions are. Last year, I don't think, it wasn't the firefighters organization. It was the police. I was met at the door by a reporter from the city. Yeah, and before I'd even sat down, you know, I was like, she was asking me all sorts of questions. I said, look, I'm not gonna talk about it, but if you wanna catch me later, I'll tell you that we met today, we made progress, and we'll meet again tomorrow. You know, so that is the extent of our.
Russ was only interested in our first session of the school district. They didn't come back.
Good, that's a good thing. That was a good thing.
What school district were you?
Lawrence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they they're wrapping up.
And I have Topeka wrapping up, hopefully wrapping up very quickly, but another one that is talking last evening about impasse. So we've, federal mediation is busy these days, just the way it is. Dean, any questions about that?
No, sir.
Tom, you got any questions about that?
I'm still reading it, Jim.
Okay.
So in section 9, Jim, it says, the mediator has no authority to compel agreement or other resolution of the dispute and will issue no written recommendations or conclusions. At the request of the parties or on the initiative of the mediator may provide an oral recommendation or opinion to resolve the dispute.
Mm-hmm.
Goes on, in that circumstance, the parties may jointly decide to implement that recommendation or opinion, but neither party is obligated to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the request of the parties, does that mean both parties have to make the request, or an individual party?
I think individual parties, Tom, quite frankly, that particular provision, I have never even confronted, because as a general proposition, when a mediator comes into a process such as this, subject of course to your resolution, the understanding is that the mediator is not going to make a determination for you. If the way I interpret that, Tom, for the most part, is kind of twofold. You ask Stephanie and I for not so much a recommendation, but an opinion. We'll be glad to provide it.
Okay,
I'll be glad to provide an opinion if I think it would be helpful to resolving that issue or the negotiation moving forward. But I would never convey those particular the subject matter nor that the content of that recommendation unless you render me with specific authority to do that.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I would say the operative word is the the mediator may, right? So sometimes parties may want us to give an opinion. Sometimes we feel like if it's not helpful, it's not helpful. So we may, we also may decline to do that. We do sort of come with an intent of no harm.
it's permissive, not
It's
mandatory.
permissive, exactly.
Exactly.
We all have different styles of mediation. Stephanie and I don't do the same thing. We're different people. We don't do the same thing all the time in each other's mediations or anything else like that. But I do have some code words when and you'll become accustomed to those over the next few days. In terms of making a recommendation, I will cue it up as this is something for you to think about. Don't feel like there's anybody putting a gun to your head or anything else like that. But this is how we resolved a dispute in another format where the dispute itself or where the subject matter was substantially similar. Again, we're only offering it. We're not compelling you to go there by any stretch of the imagination. It's just more of a philosophy of triggering your own thought processes to perhaps resolve something. Maybe you haven't thought about it. Maybe you'd like some ideas of what is going on in terms of other similar disputes. We typically will not identify the folks that we have worked with in the past. That's sort of a breach of our ethics. But by the same token, if there is something that I think is helpful, I'll offer it up as this is something you might want to think about. Okay? Questions about that?
Could I ask a
Tony,
question?
go ahead.
Could I ask a question related to the process?
Mhm.
Will, when we're in caucus, will the
Mhm.
two of you be paired up always, or will you separate?
Not always. This is the way I envision things going. And it gets back, I think Casey and I talked about it on the phone one day. We want to offer you over the next 7-day period as much continuity as we can, which is to say, I don't want to double the hill. My first inclination is to say that Stephanie and I will pretty much be together probably most of today. If there is a reason that Stephanie would feel like she needs to be in another room, or I feel like Stephanie needs to be in another room, we'll of course bring you guys into that, because it's at the end of the day, we just want to establish as safe and as fruitful of an environment as we can, fruitful in terms of getting you guys to ground zero, whatever that means. So, Tony, to be as close as I can to answering your question, for the most part today, I think Stephanie and I are going to be together. Okay, that way we don't double the hill in terms of, well, Jim, the administration was here, and well, Stephanie, the firefighters organization was here, and sometimes that can be helpful, but not all the time, and we have to be in a position to make that call. Okay? Anything else? Any other questions? Tom, if you'll sign your copy of that and then hand it to Dean for his signature, then I think we're off and running.
Just logistically, it looks as though you all do designate to go until 5 PM, generally most, okay.
We have, I think we made use of this room, and you guys went upstairs into the admin offices, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what we did last time, but this time we're different. We have a conference room just off of this room,
Mhm.
and then one downstairs, kind of in about the exact same spot, just one floor down.
Very good.
So this has all been recorded while we've been talking.
That's fine.
So this is your show, so at some point, tell us when you want that to end and move forward.
Just as a general proposition, when I want it to end is when you guys begin discussing substantively what your dispute issues are. That way it protects what the confidentiality agreement is basically intended to
Sure.
get by. So in regard to queuing it up for the mediation itself, this recording it is fine. As soon as you guys get to substance, or if I think it should otherwise be protected somehow, privileged somehow, I'll ask you to turn off your recording system. Okay? Is that something that is doable at the table, or is that something you have to get up and?
No, we have a person over here that'll shut it down and will leave the room.
Oh. I see, okay, I see a
And I
hand
pre-
going
and I
up over
presume-
there.
I presume we're now gonna proceed into substantive discussion.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm looking at see the opening statement. Are we past, I'm looking at the agenda?
That's an opening statement that was used previously in the negotiations. I think your opening statement that you just made now surpasses that. But
Surpasses that?
I usually ask that the IAFF acquiesce to what I'm saying or disagree if they have a difference of what I just said.
Okay,
So Dean, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir.
okay, very good. We've done the introduction of the mediators. Meeting format during mediation, again, we'll do joint sessions and individual caucuses. And again, just to reemphasize confidentiality, I'll cue it up as, you want me to pass that along? You want Stephanie to pass that along? We'll pass it along. You don't want to, we'll get beyond that. Okay?
I'm curious to know, just a show of hands, who here has participated in mediation with collective bargaining before? Okay.
And I wouldn't bring this up other than it's been a question that has been asked before. The mere fact that your mediation is you're continuing with your negotiation process. And I think that's pretty obvious. But by the same token, I was hit with a question about that. Are we still negotiating when we're in mediation? And I said, yeah, as far as I know, you guys are. What else would you call it? But that was a serious question. I kid you not, I couldn't make that stuff up. So again, for the most part, joint sessions and caucuses, individual caucuses. Exchange of materials, is there anything that needs to be exchanged at this point in time
Yeah, I have
in terms of a proposal?
not a proposal, but I have a couple updates that prior to you arriving, I asked if people wanted paper copies. We have, throughout this process, worked from a 4-column grid, and I can provide you with a copy if you would like one as well. It has the agreement that expires in December. It has the 7-1 proposal with the IAFF, the 7-1 proposal with the city, and anything that we have reached a tentative agreement on so far.
It was a great format from the last time, so yeah, we'd enjoy being provided a copy, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have enough?
Yes,
Laura?
I do.
Okay,
And that's the only materials that the city has.
thank you.
Generally, after each meeting, I email that out. I didn't email it out last night. I emailed it out to the rest of the group this morning. But if you would like to continue with that format, Dean or Jim, I'm happy to do that following each meeting and give us updated, at least email copies, between meetings.
Yeah, that would be great, and Stephanie and I will get you our email addresses so that you can copy us both on this stuff. This was an extraordinarily effective mechanism.
I've used this, I like it.
I generally don't bring paper unless someone requests it.
Yeah.
So we work from our email updates, but if you want paper, let me know and I'll print it off.
And you guys have gotten pretty far down the path now, so I'm assuming that has been consistent from the start.
Yes.
Very good,
Yes.
very good. Number 5 is I'm sorry, were there any additional materials to be exchanged?
No, sir.
No? Okay. Set agenda-
One other thing,
Go
Jim,
ahead, Tom.
do you have a copy of the authorizing resolution?
I do. It was, Casey provided it.
Okay.
I did not bring a hard copy. I do have it on my computer, my phone. I can access it anytime.
That gives you the format that we negotiate.
Was there any
under.
substantial difference between the resolutions from last year?
No, it's the same resolution.
It's the same resolution,
Yes.
very good. Okay, in terms of setting the agenda for the remainder of today, it might be helpful without really digging into the substance to apprise Stephanie and me of what your open issues are, in which case there's really, as long as there isn't any substance to be exchanged other than identifying those issues, there's no need to turn your recording system on. So who'd like to help me out on that one?
I'd ask Lori to go through it, and I presume Dean will talk for the
Lori.
IAFF or somebody else.
Just identify the issue, don't have to get into substance. For example, I'm thinking there's probably compensation that's still open.
Yes.
Okay.
We, as we look through this agreement, there are 3 areas that the city brought up for discussion this year. And the first 3 priorities that we looked at the agreement from, one was internal equity, the other was internal equity with other city employees throughout the organization. Market competitiveness, we have a regional market that we feel like we obtain, people choose to work with us or one of these other area agencies. And then management rights. We feel like we have a resolution that governs the process, and there are some things in the agreement that we wanted to bring closer to the resolution. And we have termed those management rights throughout our discussions. In that area, the compensation piece, you're right, is still one that is open in almost all areas. There's a few areas that we feel like we have reached tentative agreement with, but.
Just give me an idea of
Yeah.
what area.
Well,
Sick leave, for example, or something like that?
You want it topical, you don't
Just
want
topical.
detail.
pay plan,
Pay plan.
what the pay plan, what the pay plan looks like is
Mhm.
generally with agreement, I think. We haven't spent much time talking about it, but where it moves, general wage adjustment, there's a couple of adjustments to it. How employees might move within that pay plan, through this agreement is yet, under discussion.
Right. Okay, very good.
There is some discussion still in the skill incentive, not so much what they are, but that they are, what a maximum is moving forward.
Mhm.
That they, a maximum percentage that they might be able to obtain.
Mhm.
We also are having a discussion regarding something we call a longevity payment,
Mhm.
and we have not reached agreement on that either. I would say all 3 of those discussions probably move in both categories of internal equity and market competitiveness,
Okay.
generally speaking. We have a series of things that we have as a group here classified as process discussions,
Mhm.
and I would need to look up the specific articles and sections that pertains to, but there's some process, and that is different things along, don't help me out here, you guys.
Grievance procedure.
Grievance procedures,
The ordinary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
and there's 4 or 5 things there that we've called process. There is also some sections that we feel are not in alignment with our resolution, and we are asking this group to come to a resolution on aligning it with the governing resolution that we work under. And a lot of that has to do with the management rights discussion.
Okay.
That has to do, and with several sections that talk about who has the authority to decide something or manage something and what the process is for that.
Okay.
Did I hit all of the high points of what we feel like are still open? It's scattered throughout the agreement. In totality, I believe that we have reached tentative agreement on a lot of items,
Mhm.
and we have been moving forward throughout the discussions. And so I think it's just bringing us to a close on some of the things, the bigger items.
Mhm. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Tony or Casey, did you have anything else to add?
Just that the term is still
and
Term of
resolved.
the agreement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, would you add anything to that?
Yes, ma'am. I would just add that the duration of negotiations, both sides were able to present their proposals, but we ran out of time to really have dedicated discussions. So some things really are still pending discussion. And then many of the items that have a TA next to them are subject to change pending those discussions. So.
Is it your intent to continue with those discussions in the mediator's presence, which is completely your privilege? In other words, joint session?
Mhm.
Or do you envision the process moving forward? And this is a question for both the administration and firefighters. Is this something you envision taking place more or less in a caucus? I don't know how mature your discussions were where you left them.
Okay.
So in other words, is that something you want to open up on a for discussion basis in joint session, or?
Well,
We don't want to put you on the spot, Dean.
Yes.
You can talk with your guys about that.
Okay.
But that would be an initial question that we'd probably want to explore
Mhm.
in terms of most effectively moving towards an end result.
Okay.
Dean, if I might interject.
Sure.
Last year's process used what we referred to as shuttle diplomacy.
We did.
And that was a process where we met individually and shared our concerns and possible areas of movement with the mediators. It seems to me at this stage that we may be better off both sides caucusing with the mediators so that they understand our respective positions. That's up to you, though, Dean. It gives you an opportunity to sit down with the mediators and explain
Mhm.
your positions to them directly, and the same opportunity for us to explain them directly.
Yes, sir. Well, I know through the negotiation process moving into impasse, we each had to submit essentially a final contract, those final proposals.
Okay.
So we should have a clear understanding of where each side stands, and surely a mediator can identify a middle ground for those.
To help you identify middle ground, yeah.
Help us
At
identify
least-
the middle
at least-
ground
right.
between those two
Yeah.
things. So if individual caucuses works better for the city, we can get behind that.
You can accommodate that. Very good.
Dean, I'm not
Seems
saying they
something.
work better for the city, I'm just
Uh-huh.
saying that's an alternative approach that we
Okay.
used last year, so
Okay.
I'm willing to go
Yeah,
either
and-
way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just jump in here. I mean, I would guess generally Jim and I would eventually head in that direction. I do try to sort of come with, as much as you can do jointly is good, because you could sort of hear a little more, clear up any understandings in the get-go, but generally we do sort of end up in different rooms at times. So it's a tool we certainly use. But I do want to clarify, when you said that you ran out of time for dedicated discussion on some issues, and some TAs you have are sort of pending
Yes, ma'am.
those discussions, were the discussions that you wanted to have related to the issues that Lori identified, or were they different issues?
No, ma'am. So, for example, a discussion about grievance procedure
Mhm.
will have effect on some of these items that you'll see with the TA.
Okay, so there were no additional items that Lori didn't list that you guys still feel you need discussion on?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted some
Well, yeah,
clarification.
I think we'll have an opportunity to clarify
Yeah.
that too.
But I don't think either party listed their comprehensive list of what's
Got you.
left
And
on the
that's-
table to
Understood.
resolve.
Understood.
We'll flesh that out as the days go by. Days plural go by. Lori?
And I do agree with Dean that we were negotiating and discussing items clear up until the impasse date. And had that date was not sitting in front of us, there may have been a lot more opportunity for discussion at the table to get through some of those items. We spent very little time on compensation, for instance.
Yeah.
A little bit, but not a lot. And we spent very little time on this discussion of the grievance procedure,
Mhm.
which we both have a very distinct opinion on, and we haven't spent while we understand each other's position, I think, we haven't really discussed it. And so there are items in here that we have not spent much time here at the table.
And my recollection from last time,
Yeah.
at least from the administration standpoint, we did run those, we kind of came to agreement on a lot of those issues that you're talking about, that where you ran up against the impasse deadline, and you wound up with some substantive agreement via shuttle diplomacy.
Mhm.
So, very good.
Nice.
I think we can clarify those in caucus with each of you guys, and, you know, ordinarily, a mediator is going to suggest to you that if you have things that where you can establish a little bit of momentum moving forward, attack those issues first, but of course, that'd be up to you guys too. So, we'll talk about that in caucus. Thank you for the information. Discuss the future meeting schedule. The future meeting schedule, let's go back to number 5 again. Setting the agenda for the remainder of the day. My perception is at this point in time, that I'd probably want to sit with firefighters organization and go through some of this stuff, and then move on to do the same thing with the administration, but second. So that's the way I would suggest that we get started. So whatever that looks like at the end of the day. Now, I would also tell you that, of course, we like to keep things moving along, but we also understand that you guys are in a process on both sides of the table of internal deliberations. And again, getting back to the process issue, and I probably should have identified it. You do not offend me, and I won't speak for Stephanie, you don't offend me if you should want to talk about your deliberations outside the presence of a mediator. We get that. There's a certain editorial effect in regard to divulging things for somebody who's might be an acquaintance, but might not necessarily be, I'm tempted to say intuitive, but intimately involved in the negotiations or anything else like that. So again, if you need the free time, and I think this is the way we did it quite a bit last year, all you guys got to do is ask, and we're out.
So
That's fine.
basically what you're saying is the IAFF or the management team can caucus away from the mediators.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, very often, if we can be of help, we'll suggest this, that, or the other, but as a natural matter, sometimes those suggestions lead to internal deliberations, and that's where, if you ask us to leave, we're on board with that, okay? The only issue is I would ask you to be respectful of the administration's and the firefighters' time in terms of moving forward. 2 and 3 hours is probably, let's call it an informal ground rule. That's too long. But sometimes 45 minutes isn't long enough. I get that. I'm not going to put a hard stop on anything. It's you guys' bargaining agreement that we intend to help you to the extent that we can get to the end game on. So just bear with us in that regard. And again, you don't hurt my feelings whatsoever. I understand the deliberative process. Okay? I think the future meeting schedule is pretty well set forth there. And
Can I make a statement?
go ahead.
We've had a practice of informing everyone of our schedule,
Mhm.
so that there's notice of who will be participating in these, and I have to disclose that I will not be participating on August 7th.
In that regard, there's a very strong possibility I will not be able to be here tomorrow. But having said that, I know that Stephanie is available.
Yes.
So there will be no loss of continuity. Okay? So these are things that come up in a mediator's lifetime when, as parties get into negotiations, they strike impasse. So, and when they do that, very often they reach out for a mediator's presence to get over that impasse. There's nothing you can do about that. It's part of the business. So, at any rate, thank you for that, Tony. I appreciate you telling me of that tradition. Agenda for the next meeting, that is going, so
Jill,
far, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So Jill and I were just saying this is probably the day that Jill's here.
Yeah, I'm sketchy tomorrow with my childcare, and I'm out on vacation, that I can't reschedule all next week, so.
And that happens as well. We, of course, I would suggest that we keep Jill on the distributional list. And really at that, in terms of email traffic.
Yes.
And other than that, thank you for the heads up,
Yeah,
okay? Agenda for the next meeting pretty much is dependent on where you get to by the end of the day. So typically, on a day-to-day basis, as a mediator, we wind up substantive discussions 10 to 15 minutes early, which would indicate like 4:45 today, and set an agenda for the next meeting date, whatever date that might be. So that is typically how we manage it. We are, of course, open to suggestions in terms of you all's agenda in regard to the substance of the matters. So any questions about that? Okay, with that, why don't Stephanie and I visit with the firefighters organization, and I'll depend on somebody to point me out to the room. Is the firefighters organization over here? Or?
They're downstairs.
They're downstairs.
They'll escort you there.
Very
if you'd
good.
like.
I know where this room is.
We'll get
Thanks.
some stair steps. I didn't wear my Fitbit.